Hey everyone, so let's go through our final composition assignment. It is just writing a melody that fits with a really common popular music chord progression, 1, 5, 6, 4. So you can always click on your MuseScore template file to get started, or grab a PDF right from our Canvas assignment, download that and do it by hand. It's totally up to you. I'm going to use a program that I'm comfortable with. Now, there are a couple rules that we need to follow, so I'm just going to walk us through all of those and then create a first assignment. So the first thing is we need a time signature of 4/4. So I'm going to grab myself a 4/4 time signature and put it in there. And I'm going to have one chord per measure. So I should either have 5 measures so that I can have each of my 4 chords, 1, 5, 6, 4, and then come back to 1 at the end in the 5th, or go through the whole thing twice so that I can write a longer melody, which means I need 9 measures twice through the chord progression, and then a final measure again ending on 1. Our chord progression needs to be in a specific key. Our options are C, G, D, A, F, and B flat. I'm going to go for D, which is 2 sharp. So I'm going to put in my key signature there. I've got my piano score here. And I'm going to put all my chords in the low, deeper hand, the left hand in the bass clef, and then I'm going to put my melody in the treble. It's okay to do it the other way, but the standard way to do it is with the treble, so that you can hear your melody kind of floating above your chords. So I'm going to just set up by putting one chord in each measure as instructed. So I'm going to just use a whole note, and I'm in D, and I got to start on 1, so that means I just need a D chord. I'm going to put all 3 of those notes in. And then I'm going to move to my next measure, and now I need 5, which means I need an A chord. And 6 means B minor. And 4, which means G. And then I'm going to go back to home, because I'm only going to do the 5 measure version, back on D. Okay, so I've got my chords set up. I'm just going to hear that once. Cool. So that's all taken care of. That's rule number 1 and 2, all set. And now, to write my melody, to make sure that my melody is going to sound good, we have a few rules about what we're allowed to do. And most of those have to deal with how the melody relates to the chord that's underneath it. So most of those have to do with making sure that I stick, for the most part, to the notes that belong in my chord. So I'm going to go ahead and just write in each letter of each chord so that I'm aware of what I'm doing as I write my melody. So I've got a D, a F, and an A. Really, it's F sharp. I might as well put that in there. I'm going to put it underneath here. Cool, and then next one, I've got A, C sharp, and E. And this is just for my own notes, but it's going to help as I write my melody to the rules. You don't need to put this in, but it's going to help if you do, and you can always delete these later. And then we're back to D, F sharp, and A. Cool, so now I know exactly what letters are in my chords. And the rule is that every beat 1 of every measure needs to be one of the notes that's in the chord underneath it, which means D, F sharp, and A are the only notes I'm allowed for my first note. A, C sharp, and E are the only notes I'm allowed to choose from for my first beat of my second measure. B, D sharp, F sharp are my only choices for beat 1 of the next. And I'm going to use a whole note for my last measure, and it's best to really just end on D, but you can do any note that belongs in the chord. Just make sure it's a whole note. I'm going to go with D. So I'm going to just pick all my opening notes. I'm just going to grab a quarter note, and I'm going to start on D2. I like starting and ending on the same note. And in my second measure, I think I'm going to end up on C sharp. And in my third, I'm going to pick F sharp from my B, D, and F sharp choices. And I'm going to go with maybe the G of the G chord. My other rule is that I have to use a couple of eighth notes in every measure. So I'm going to make sure that I'm going to plan out a little bit of fast note time, a couple of eighth notes in every measure. And that doesn't include rests. And then finally, we can step anywhere we want throughout this whole thing. We can step alphabetically as I want through each note. But if I skip a note, I have a special rule. And the rule is if I want to skip, it's got to belong in the chord. So if I skip from D, I've got to jump to either an F sharp, an A, or a D an octave away. I can't jump from D to B because B doesn't belong in the chord. Same deal for the second measure. It's different rules for every chord. So now I can only jump between these three letters and so forth. Now I can jump from a note that belongs in the D chord, like the F sharp, to a note that belongs in the A chord. So as long as it's belonging and then it's belonging again, you can jump, right? So from the end of one measure into the next, you can do those kinds of jumps. So I could jump from a D to a C as long as I'm going D and then maybe a C way up here or an E. I can only jump though if I'm jumping into something that belongs in the chord. All right, so I'm going to write a few letters in here. And I've already done something illegal. So I'm going to write like that. I'm going to go write down steps for my first measure. And there is an A and then jumping to a C. Am I allowed to do that? Well, A is in my chord, so I'm allowed to jump away from that A. Is it allowed to jump into a C? Well, C belongs too, so belongs in the D chord, belongs in the A chord. I'm good. That jump is allowed. And I'm just going to check that. I'm going to play it back. I like it. Sounds pretty nice. But I have one more thing that I've missed, which is I have to have at least 2 eighth notes in here. So I'm going to add some eighth notes. And they're all steps, so I know I can use any notes I want. Yep, and now I don't like that arrival point as much. I'm going to go there. Am I allowed to jump from F sharp to C sharp? Yes, I am. F sharp belongs in the D. Next measure, does C belong? Yes, C sharp's right there. Okay, and I'm going to go right ahead with my... And that's by steps, so I'm allowed to do that there from one chord to the next. And I want to do some more skips. I've done a lot of stepping around. I want a little contrast in this one. So I'm going to walk down the notes that I'm allowed. I'm going to skip to a D. That's the nearest thing from that F. And then to a B. And then maybe even back up to D. I'm still breaking a rule because I don't have 2 eighth notes, so I'm going to add it here. And I want my melody to stick out better, so I'm just making it loud. And we just need a few more notes to fill in. Let's try this, see what happens. Works. And that's it. That's my final composition. When I jump, it needs to be notes within the chord. So if I jump within a measure, it needs to be jumping between the notes of the chord. If I jump from one measure to the next, then it has to be a note that belongs in the chord for this measure, and then it has to be a note that belongs in a chord for this measure. Those are the only rules. So as long as you have your eighth notes, you get your chords right for the key that you choose, you're going to be good to go. And this should be a fun exercise. It really starts to sound like music right about now. So have fun. Send me an email if you need some help with anything.